Good morning, colleagues, or good afternoon, colleagues. Thanks for joining us. We are holding one of our webinars that we usually have. Colleagues, South Africa is one of the developing countries failing to ignite economic growth and address social disparities. Most countries, especially developing nations, face the problem of crony capitalism. It is interesting to note that of the top 10 countries with the tendency towards crony capitalism, 7 are in Asia. I want to submit that South Africa is no different. Crony capitalism is rife in our country. I also want to submit that crony capitalism is prevalent in private and public sector. It manifests in all levels of government and in all departments, including the SOEs, the state-owned enterprises. Let me repeat. I want to submit that crony capitalism is prevalent in private and public sector in South Africa. It manifests in all levels of government and in all the departments, including the state-owned enterprises. In unpacking crony capitalism and its effects, our focus should be on the lives of the poor people. How is crony capitalism affecting their livelihood, and how is crony capitalism contributing towards social conflicts within our communities? Today, our topic looks at the issue of social or crony capitalism. One of the presenters that is going to be presenting to us is a scholar around this topic. Welcome to our Zoom session. My name is Sediko Rakolote, the founder and the trustee of Progressive Social Economic Investment Institute. I'm facilitating this session in my capacity as the founder and the trustee of the Progressive Social Economic Investment Institute. The views that are going to be raised in this platform by the participants are not representing the views of our trust. Thanks for joining the session. We're also live on my Facebook page, Sediko Rakolote. I said the presenter of today's topic will cover social and political capital, crony capitalism in post-apartheid South Africa. The presenter has got a B.Admin in political studies, B. Honors in political science, the Masters of Arts in Political Science, and a PhD. Born from Sweden. In his life, and I don't know if you'll appreciate if I'm sharing this, in his life, there was a time where he dropped out of school for 3 years and was selling vegetables or fruits around the streets and paid around 300 rand if he'll be paid at that time. But he decided to go back to school and finish his matric in 2002 and pursued his studies. As he stands now, he's a senior lecturer at the University of Nelson Mandela University at Port Elizabeth. Colleagues, we are fortunate to have Dr. Ntsikelelo Breakfast to come and present to us on this topic that covers crony capitalism. We appreciate your time, Dr. Ntsikelelo. We are humbled to host you. We really appreciate having the scholar like you to come and unpack this topic. Welcome, colleagues. This is going to be a very interactive session. Feel free, take notes, and engage Dr. Ntsikelelo. Without a waste of time, over to you, Dr. Ntsikelelo Breakfast, and welcome.
Thank you very much, Ndate Sediko, for that introduction. I must say that it's an honor and a privilege to be hosted by you. And the title of my presentation is Social and Political Capital, Crony Capitalism in Post-Apartheid South Africa. And I want to kick off by what I call conceptual analysis. and just break down these concepts. So what do I mean by social and political capital? I draw my definition from Pierre Bourdieu, who was a French scholar. I do appreciate, though, the intellectual contribution of Karl Marx in terms of the conceptualization of the concept of capital, in terms of different types of capital and so on. But I've chosen the definition of Pierre Bourdieu because I think it is relevant to my topic here. So according to him, basically he talks about what he calls cultural capital, which refers to knowledge that is acquired and accumulated and institutionalized by the elite in pursuit of upward social mobility. And according to Anton Giddens, upward social mobility has to do with acquiring assets, status, power, and so on. And by Crony capitalism, I'm talking about corruption that embeds itself within the capitalist mode of production, through networks and so on. And I also like the definition of Robert Putnam, who talks about networks and political connections when he talks about social capital and also political capital. But Ben Fine, on the other hand, argues that more often than not, social capital is used for purposes of upward social mobility. Now, this paper is taken from an article that I've just published in an internationally accredited journal. You can Google it with the same title. I have co-authored it with a colleague of mine who is an economist from the University of Stellenbosch, who really helped me with the quantification of data. Now, one of our macroeconomic policy objectives is to achieve high levels of economic growth. And you know as well as I do that our economy has not been growing the way it should have, partly because of how it was mismanaged. And as a result of that, currently unemployment, according to the recent report of the World Bank, is basically sitting at 29%, and also it is worse amongst the youth. I think it is sitting at 54%, and that is the official definition, not the expanded one. Maybe if it was the expanded one, it would have been worse. And also our Gini coefficient is the highest in the world in terms of the binary between the haves and the have-nots. It is sitting at 0.68%. Now, again, to beef up that argument, when one examines the report by Stats SA, the one of late. It says that almost 50% of the South African population is under extreme poverty. And again, you know, I understand that this has historical factors, but at the same time, I think institutionalization of corruption has made it worse. And that means that due to corruption, the fight against inequality, poverty, unemployment becomes a mission impossible, because the money that is meant for development doesn't reach where it's supposed to. Now, this is a specific kind of corruption. This is what I call neo-patrimonialism. And again, you know, it begs the question about conceptual clarity. What do I mean by neo-patrimonialism? Neo-patrimonialism is the kind of corruption that is practiced by the political elite that is at the helm of power, who normally dish out favors to their henchmen in exchange for support in order to hold on to power a bit longer. And this is what you know, David Harvey calls accumulation by a disposition, which is a covert way of accumulating wealth by the bourgeoisie class or by the elite. And I mean, I want to argue that this is also a continuation of primitive accumulation, even though that kind of model of accumulation was applied during the epoch of feudalism. But I want to argue that the issue of personal accumulation cannot be attributed to, you know, one president of the country or one president of the ANC, because even before Msholozi, for instance, there were people who were arguing that, you know, people like Ramaphosa, Tokyo Sekwale, Sakima Tozoma, Patrice Motsepe were using social capital and political capital in pursuit of personal accumulation in order to have upward social mobility. And they were getting, you know, lucrative BE deals. And also, if one looks at the reports of the AG, year in, year out, you know, they point out how, you know, public officials are doing business with the state, and how some of the service providers are appointed because of their employment of social capital or political capital. Now, there have been 4 reports on state capture. There have been 4 reports which are confirming the existence of a state capture. And I mean, if one you know, looks at, for instance, the role that Duduzane Zuma played just after his father ascended to power in I think in 2007, in 2008, him and Tony Gupta established a company called, I think, West Dawn Investments. And also he served as a director, including his sister, Duduzile, in Sahara Computers. And those companies were doing business with the state. Surely there must have been something wrong in that arrangement. And I think that should never have happened, because clearly, I mean, that is conflict of interest. But I want to qualify that, because this is a very sensitive matter and a very controversial matter, by saying that I do acknowledge the phraseology of white monopoly capital. It does exist, because the relationship between Black people and white people is a relationship of power. The majority of Black people are selling their labor power to white monopoly capital, because capital has a color in exchange for income, and that is a relationship of also exploitation. And I also do appreciate the need for the implementation of RET, radical economic transformation. But I don't think that what had happened in the past should have happened in terms of corruption on a large scale. I don't think that, for instance, that the argument holds water that says that what had happened was not corruption, but an implementation of RET. I'm very critical of that. I take that with a pinch of salt. I think what had happened should never have happened. I mean, I've spoken about the conflict of interest and so on. But I also want to argue that one cannot attribute state capture to only the Guptas. I think also, the president also has a case to answer, because it is common knowledge that he received 500,000 from the late Gavin Watson from Busasa, and there is a case before the court of law, and the president has, I beg your pardon. Anyway, be that as it may, the president has also sealed the names of the people who contributed to his campaign. Now, he who pays the piper calls the tune. In the domain of politics, there are no freebies. I think there was an economic exchange in that kind of an arrangement. And I think maybe the president also is compromised in so far as the issue of state capture is concerned. Again, it begs the question about the conceptualization of state capture. What do we mean by state capture? And to understand the concept, I think we need to understand the concept of state. Now, there are two main arguments here. On the one hand, you have a Marxist and Leninist argument that the state is an instrument of oppression, or the state is an expression of capitalist interests, or the state is an expression of class antagonism. Meaning that the South African state has always been captured since its inception. But I think that is a Marxist and Leninist, definition. And South Africa is a liberal, democratic state. So that argument, I think, falls away. I don't think that it is applicable in this regard, because some people are using it, to debunk the myth that we have had state capture. And again, I want to maintain my argument that some of the things that have happened should never have happened. But my line of argument is that the employment of social and political capital has been made worse by the application of neoliberalism, which has created a scope for corruption, networks, accumulation, and so on. I mean, if you look at, for instance, the number of people who are employed at local government level, the numbers have been decreasing. Municipalities don't employ a lot of people because of the elevation of the market forces above the state, because most of the stuff that should have been done by state institutions now is done by private service providers. And again, that happens through public-private partnerships, triple BEs, and so on. And I think that has really affected the capacity of the state to promote development. And there is a wealth of evidence, from people like David Harvey, Naomi Klein, Joseph Stiglitz, who was a director at the World Bank, and also, wrote a book about that titled Globalization and its Discontents, and went around the world, facilitating the implementation of those policies, and wrote a book that those policies do not achieve their intended objectives. So I think the neoliberal agenda has affected our development trajectory, and has created a culture of accumulation for the elite, a very tiny minority of people who are normally aligned to the ruling party. I do agree, though, with the point that you made earlier on, and that Sediko, that corruption is not just a buzzword, but it is a systemic, and it is embedded both in the public sector and also in the private sector. I mean, we've heard about stories such as, the story of Marcus Joster, who manipulated the financial statements of Steinhoff. We've heard about stories of KPMG, and the list is endless. So also the private sector does contribute to this kind of corruption. But I think at the same time, people don't vote for the private sector. Not to say that the private sector should not fix the problem that the country is faced with. I'm simply saying that government must take the lead in terms of waging a war on corruption. And I'm proposing that the capacity of the state, it needs to be beefed up. It's not the role of the market forces, to promote development. I don't agree that, if you want to promote development, you must grow the economy, and then you're going to have a trickling down effect. And by so doing, the benefits of economic growth will be felt by the poorest of the poor on the ground. That is a myth. I mean, we saw what had happened during the epoch of Guille. We had an economy that was growing, but on the other hand, inequality was also growing. Anyway, without any further ado, Ntate Sediko, I will hand over to you.
Thank you so much, Doc, for that presentation. We really appreciate the presentation. Now it's time to engage. Colleagues, feel free to ask questions, make inputs and comments. Dr. Ntsikelelo has said, in the domain of politics, there are no freebies. The state has been tenderized. The provision of the services at the state level has been given to private sectors, particularly at the local government level, and people are no longer going to be employed there. But there are some questions that I got from Professor Hanyane from Northwest University. He's got 3 questions. The first question is that, what is the African interpretation of the concept capital from a continental perspective and South African perspective? What is the African interpretation of the concept capital from continental perspective and South African perspective? His second question is patrimonialism synonymous with state capture? Is patrimonialism synonymous with a state capture? And his last question is radical economic transformation a legitimate political and economic response? And does it provide an idealist response to the socio-economic challenges faced by South Africans? Those are the 3 questions that I got from Facebook. Colleagues, we will take now questions and inputs from those who are participating in the webinar. Please raise up your hand. We take comments and inputs, then give a chance to Dr. Ntsikelelo Breakfast to respond. I'm opening up for you, colleagues. Raise up your hand. Make comments, input. Then we'll allow Dr. Ntsikelelo to respond. Or while you're still thinking about your inputs or comments, let's allow Dr. Ntsikelelo to respond to the questions that are coming from Professor Hanyane. You can go on, Dr. Ntsikelelo.
Yeah, thank you very much, Ntate Sediko, for the questions from the professor. So I think RET is a good policy on paper. I think the ANC adopted it in its last conference as a policy of government and also a policy of the ruling party, which is all well and good. But I'm very critical how it came into the picture in the South African body politic. I think it was part of what I call counter hegemony, in the sense that it was part of psychological warfare, in the sense that I think at some point Msholozi and his political allies, I think they felt that they were under siege, that the media was taking a swipe at them. because there were a lot of allegations of corruption and so on. And maybe some were valid and some were not. But also I understand that even the media also has, you know, a class interest as well. So this is a very complex matter. But I don't think that it came into the picture in good faith. I think it was part of counter hegemony to divert our attention from corruption to the power relations between you know, capital and I would say, you know, the working class. And I think the NDZ camp took a, you know, strategic advantage of what was happening and used that to their own advantage. State capture, I think it is an expression of neo-patrimonialism, but I don't think that it is only confined to that, because one of the reports among the ones that I cited, in particular that one of Thuli Madonsela, talks about how the Gupta family had a grip over the former president, and how it is alleged that they influenced the appointment of ministers and so on. But it can also manifest itself in a different form. The concept of, you know, state capture at a theoretical level, I think it's a new concept. I don't think that there has been some serious theorization on that score. I know that there are some academics in the country who wrote a book about that, but besides that, I've not come across, I might be wrong, some serious, you know, academic literature on that. But this concept of you know, patrimonialism and neo-patrimonialism is an old concept. Look, I mean, the first question about an African interpretation of capital, I think capital should be examined on a global scale. I think we need to look at the bigger picture, because capital is not only confined to one country or to a continent. It you know, expands. I think it was Marx and Engels who once said that the history of all hitherto is a history of class struggle. So the struggles of the working class on a global scale are similar. I mean, if you go to, you know, the Latin American states, Europe, and blah, 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 you find similar struggles of oppression and so on. So I prefer an internationalist approach, but I do acknowledge that in our country, there is an element of race, because capital does have a color, and the majority of people who are bearing the brunt of oppression are Black because of our context. As you know, I mean the history of Black people is the history of oppression. So I would vouch for an international outlook of capital.
Thank you, Doc. I will go and take some hands now from colleagues that are in the webinar. Lwando.
Thank you, facilitator, and also let me thank Doctor for giving us the presentation. It's quite sparking some sort of engagement in my mind, or let me rather saying it's opening, it's mind opening, because when you speak about systems, I have a feeling that we are not only looking at what happened from 1960 up until today, but we are also looking at what happened after the World War II. Where I'm going, it's the point that you know, after World War II, the IMF, World Bank, on this thing of developing economies, they wanted to be the driving forces of development to those countries that were economically affected by the war, your third world countries, and then how they portioned, how they presented their views was on the issue of structural adjustment programs, where they explain everything, they take off and so on and so forth when it comes to the issues of development, developing those countries that were badly affected by the war. Now, in that process, there were certain countries that did not agree with them in terms of taking on and subscribing to their agenda of developing those countries that were affected by the World War II. Yeah. So my point on this matter is to fast forward it to what today we know as the formation of BRICS. To me, if BRICS came with a concept, and it came with a program that seeks to present the alternative to those programs of the World Bank and IMF, those that were called structural adjustment, was most of the African countries to date, they are indebted to that program of structural adjustment. So as time went by, those countries, they are not economically independent, because they've got these handouts that they must ensure that these three, IMF, World Bank, and the US Treasury, they have to ensure that they pay back all those kind of development assistance that they got from those ones that started the structural adjustment programs. Now, where I'm going, I want to get a clarity, Doc, on the issue of, according to your understanding on the issues of BRICS versus the West. Do you think that as yes, the RET, I think it's also subscribes to the BRICS formation, and so do you think that that process of aligning with the BRICS instead of the West, which are our oppressors, was it an approach that was good for our economy? It happened that the RET things that happened previously, which you also mentioned that they should not have happened. I also agree with you that yes, in terms of policy and the implementation, it is good, but how it was implemented, it raises eyebrows, of which those things today, the ones that you have been questioned about. So my point is that when I talk, do you see that BRICS was an alternative, or is still an alternative to the West, to our oppressors? Thank you.
Sure. Lwando, I agree with you with regard to the application of neoliberalism via the IMF and World Bank. I agree with you that both multilateral institutions are a platform to basically disseminate these neoliberal ideas. And I support, the idea of the BRICS, of post-Washington consensus, as opposed to a Washington consensus model, which is a synonym of neoliberalism. When the conception of the BRICS came into the picture, it was a counter-hegemonic strategy to pose a threat to the current world order of neoliberalism. But I don't think that Wenalwando BRICS was a brainchild of Msholo. You must remember, it must be borne in mind that BRICS, first of all, it was there, the idea was there even while former President Mbeki held the position of being a president. There were debates even at that time in terms of what was happening, in terms of the Doha round table and so on, how the Europeans were subsidizing farmers, but preventing African countries from subsidizing their farmers. So it's not like it's an idea that came from Msholozi, the way some people now are interpreting it, that the BRICS is a brainchild of Msholozi. I don't think that is an honest opinion. The idea has always been there, even while former President Mbeki was a president. But yes, it's a noble idea. Also, on that score, it must be borne in mind again that South Africa got co-opted. South Africa has the smallest economy as opposed to the economies of India, Brazil, China, Russia. You can't compare South Africa with those countries. South Africa was co-opted for strategic reasons because it was seen to be a gateway to Africa. But I think at a strategic level, in terms of the way things are at the moment, in terms of hegemony, it's good to have a political bloc like the BRICS to pose a threat to the world order, which is a neoliberal world order. But I think also there is some kind of political maneuverability, by Msholozi in terms of, and also his political bloc in terms of his, interpretation of BRICS. But the idea is noble.
Thank you. I'm getting a lot of questions on Facebook for you, Doc. One of the questions is from Buso Shabalala. He says, where did crony capitalism originate? Why and how? Did it die down in the place of origin, only to reimagine the third world and South Africa? Why and how did it die, if it did? So what will lead to its death here in South Africa? What concrete examples of crony capitalism do we have in South Africa? I think that's one is key. What concrete examples of chronic capitalism do we have in South Africa? Those are the questions from Buso Shabalala on Facebook.
Thank you very much, colleague, for that question from Ndade Shabalala. My view is that, capitalism is a continuation of feudalism. So I don't think that it can be confined to the global south or the so-called third world countries. I think it's a global phenomenon. I mean, if you look at the work that Joseph Stiglitz did, also look at the work that Naomi Klein did on, the intellectual history or the historical development of neoliberalism. And also you look at, the stuff that David Harvey did. It shows that even in the US, in Russia, in Britain, and so on, that there have been tendencies of crony capitalism. So I don't think that we should only attribute it to Africa or to South Africa. But there have been examples of crony capitalism in South Africa. I mean, if you look at the networks, in terms of the people who have received in the past, the lucrative BE deals. And so, I mean, the list is endless. I've cited some well-known people before in my presentation, reports from the AG are laying bare that, year in and year out, even the 4 reports that I've spoken about on state capture, they also speak about that. But I must strike a balance that I'm not arguing that state capture must only be attributed to the Guptas. I think there is more to that than meets the eye. I think Busasa also is at fault, and also other market forces. So it's a very complex phenomenon, as opposed to be, simplistic or straightforward and only blame one family. I mean, we've heard stories, for instance, about mineral energy complex, which is an expression of white monopoly capital as a center of accumulation to amass wealth. And there are some families that are involved in those conglomerates, Oppenheimer, De Beers, the Ruperts, and so on.
Thank you, Doc. Colleagues or who are on the webinar, any inputs, comments? Just welcome Faith Motambi, Honorable Faith Motambi, Member of Parliament, who is part of our sessions here. But Doc, what are the effects of crony capitalism to the society? Is there any link on the effects of crony capitalism? Is there any causal link between the effects of crony capitalism to social conflicts that are there within the communities? That will be my
yeah. So most of our structural challenges with regard to inequality, poverty, unemployment, they have been caused by and large by historical factors. I don't want to be simplistic and say that they were only caused by corruption. But I think what corruption has done is to compound the situation. So I think there is a symbiotic relationship between underdevelopment and institutionalization of corruption. But I think when a war is being waged on corruption, it must be waged across the board, not in a factional way. You know what I mean? I don't think that people must pick and choose who to pursue in terms of charges and so on. So the issue of waging a war on corruption, it must not be used for political point scoring.
Okay.
You find other people are left off the hook, and other people, the media, repeats their names. For instance, I mean, anyway, let me not go there, but you get the picture.
Okay, thank you, Doc. You don't want to go there. Colleagues, any inputs, comments, questions to Doc before we close on this topic that we had today? Honorable Faith Mutambi, your hand is up.
You unmute me.
Yes.
Thank you so much, and greetings everybody in the platform. Just to appreciate the presentation from Doc. It's indeed a very thought-provoking and eye-opener at the same time. Then I just wanted Prof, maybe his comments on the following. You'll recall with this COVID-19 pandemic, there's something strange that is happening in this democratic government. It's for the first time in the history of this democratic government wherein procurement was done without following the provision of Section 217 of the Constitution of the Republic of South Africa. Maybe because we're in the state of a disaster wherein then PPEs were procured without following the normal tenders as prescribed in Section 217, as I've said earlier. You will recall that Section 217, for those of you who, I'm just summarizing, it says that when an organ of state in the national, provincial, or local government or any institution contracts for goods and services, then it must do so in accordance with the system which is fair, equitable, transparent, competitive, and cost-effective. Then, Prof. Doctor, I wanted this clarity to say, given the current PPE scandals, you know that now everywhere when you go, you are told the SIU is busy investigating, and it has struck society at large, wherein with you check at times these PPEs that you are referring to, they were meant for the poor of the poorest. You find that in some of the hospitals, doctors and nurses were using something that was of substandard, all in the name of government procurement. So I wanted you to then maybe expand a bit as to this. Is it not also a form of crony capitalism? So the point that, what is your view to that respect? Thank you so much, Convener.
Thank you, Honorable Mutambi. Over to you, Doc.
No, thank you very much to Mayor Mutambi. I think you've hit the nail on the head on that score, that what you have referred to is an epitome of neo-patrimonialism, crony. In fact, I would argue that corruption has been worse of late than it was in the past. I think also maybe what has fueled the perceptions about the fact that only certain people who are aligned to the former president are being pursued is the media, because of the Hollywood style of arrests And you get the impression that the people who are normally caught or who are reported to be on the run, it's only people maybe who were close to the former president. But there is no mention or emphasis of those ones who are aligned to the current president, meaning that I get the impression that, you know, maybe the war that has broken out in the ANC in the form of factionalism is diffusing itself also to the state machinery, and only certain people who are aligned to the former president are being targeted, because we have not heard of people, I mean, there must have been people who are aligned to the current president who have also employed social capital or political capital in pursuit of personal accumulation in order to have upward social mobility, who have also benefited from the PPEs and so on. But we have not seen those arrests. So all in all, what I'm saying that I think also factionalism is playing itself out in the arrests of late.
Thank you, Doc. Any inputs, comments from colleagues on the who are part of the webinar? There is Luando. You can come in again, my brother, Luando. Luando.
Unmute. Oh, sorry, man. I'm technologically disadvantaged, so these things are really not sitting well with me. Just one comment on the issue of systems, you know, because we believe that before we can really liberate ourselves, we must liberate our minds from the oppressors, you know. But looking onto the tools of going towards the liberation, which we see that education is supposed to play that role in ensuring that at least we do not think with our minds chained to this thing of dependency to our colonizers. Ne? Now I want to check with Doc that do you think that our education system is doing justice in terms of ensuring that these the current economic system does really complement the skills, or does really complement our education system, which is the syllabus and so on and so forth, to ensure that at least the state and to ensure that the poor and the working class participate in the economic activities. I just want to ask that question before we can close the session. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Luando. Over to you, Doc.
Look, education is part of, you know, the superstructure. It is also part of the capitalist mode of production. Academic institutions are part of the superstructure, and then you get the base, which has to do with you know, the ownership of the means of production, which is a feeder system to education. So education is ideology. It reflects ideas of a particular class. I think it was you know, Marx once said that the ideas that are dominant in any capitalist mode of a production are the ideas of the ruling class. So the education that we acquire is not, you know, objective. It has a class interest. That's why, for instance, you find that the graduates that are taken seriously are the ones that, you know, do like BSc, BCom, you know, accounting, because those skills, they are a lifeblood to a capitalist economy. So education also is not ideologically neutral. I think it is a feeder system to the capitalist mode of production and capital accumulation.
Thank you, Doc, and thank you, Lord, for that question. Yeah, it's scary to hear that education on its own is not objective. It fits an interest of a particular class. So the curriculum is developed for the purpose of a particular class. Therefore, if you want to deal with the system, you should also look at dealing with the curriculum that has been fed to students, either from early childhood development level to tertiary, because the system on its own entrenches itself through ideologies. So if we want to deal with capitalism and all its effects and advances the interests of a society, we should also deal with education, curriculum development. That's what you are saying, Doc.
Yes.
Thank you so much. Colleagues, any inputs, comments from colleagues before we close? Our session was supposed to be for an hour. Now we are on hour 5 minutes. Any inputs, comments before we close? Oh, again, Faith Mutampi.
Sorry, my apologies. The gadgets are messing me up. And
Okay.
pardon me, I'm in the village, you know, the video, it's a problem.
Yes.
Yeah, I think we should appreciate this discussion, but one would like to propose that maybe in future, we must actually come back here at home to expand more on this topic, Doc.
Yes.
And then we put it in line with this biggest, the country's PPE scandal. Because, you know, I think we need to discuss the aftermath of this COVID-19 pandemic, where I'm seated in line with the topic in question. Because from where I'm seated, if you check the whole saga around that, as you heard me quoting the Constitution, in our case, there's been a deliberate systematic use of public policy to rig the market in the way that benefited the politically connected actors. I'm raising this because, you know, when level 5 started, our sponsor shops couldn't open, but your big ones, ShopRite, Checkers, since level 1, they were allowed to operate. And we must understand the political economy of this country and the impact of this pandemic has brought now. You check people who were told that they're going to benefit from the UIF. You check the AG's report on that. Monies were not paid for the actual beneficiaries. Prisoners received UIF. People who were dead. So I should think we need to further expand this topic from where I'm seated as Sediko. Yes. So that we can start to have structures topic out of the main heading. I think that will assist us to start to have an engagement. But from where I'm seated, I always find these debates that you normally conduct very useful and empowering. Thank you so much. And I want to appreciate your input as well, Doc, for today.
Thank you so much, Honorable Mutampi. I want to say, because Honorable Mutampi is talking about the after effects of COVID, especially on the issue of crony capitalism. My view is that in every panic, the people who benefit from panic is capital. In every war, the war benefits capital. Where there's instability benefits capital. So capital took advantage of the pandemic and quickly used the existing instrument, the very same thing that Honorable Mutambi is speaking. They used the systems within the constitutions and bypass that system and say, okay, because there's a pandemic, now we are going to procure not following this because we're dealing with pandemic. And in that process, capital benefited. So in every panic, war, or instability, the biggest benefactors remains capital. Over to you, Doc.
No, I fully concur with Mayor Mutambi that when the dust has settled, I need to come back when the outbreak is over. Maybe we need to re-examine the after effects of COVID-19. So I've taken that upon myself, and I'm committing myself in public to come back.
Thank you, Doc, for that commitment. Colleagues, in the absence of any inputs, comments, or further questions, we are about to close. I thank you so much for participating in this session. Thanks also to colleagues who have logged into our Facebook pages. We really appreciate this Progressive Socio-Economic Investment Trust. We will continue holding various webinars touching on topics that other people don't want to touch to. We are looking for a person who can come and present to us political interference versus political intervention in public administration. We want someone who will come and be bold and come and say, I will present that topic. If you know someone, I'm opening up, please contact me. We want someone who will come and present political intervention versus political interference in public service. Because every time you hear that there was political interference, and the politician will say, it was not an interference, but it was just an intervention. So colleagues, with those words, thank you for participating. Remember, colleagues, level 1 does not mean that there's no longer COVID. Please go out there and adhere to COVID protocols. Always put your mask when you go outside there. Keep your social distancing, wash your hands, and please remain safe. We love you. Have a lovely Saturday afternoon. Thank you so much, Doc. Thank you so much, colleagues.
Thank you very much, sir. All the best, sir. Go well, sir. Thank you very much.
Yes.